Well, welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
And my name is Joe Augustine, and speaking on behalf of Tim Wade, who is hurtling somewhere between a polyclinic and his home, we would like to welcome you to the show that tries to make life, I'd say, more interesting, more informed, and hopefully gives you a little something to base your arguments on. You know, don't get into arguments where you have no idea why you feel about something. Get some facts behind it. Maybe then have the argument without the emotions. And we hope to power better conversations, not just on the internet, but everywhere in the world.
Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. And by the way, your microphone's crackling now.
Oh yeah, I think I'm being a bit too loud on this microphone. Let me pull back a little bit. Is this sounding a bit better? Not too loud.
Yeah, that's better.
I did the thing where you upgrade your computer and unexpected things happen. So I did that just the other day, and a whole bunch of stuff that used to work perfectly, of course, now doesn't. And I keep getting reminded by all the manufacturers that they hope that I enjoy all the upgrades that I'm enjoying. So
yeah, I know that feeling. I just don't know how to fix it. All right, shall we introduce our special guest today while we're waiting on Tim?
Yes. So as part of the show, we like to bring in additional perspectives. So this week, we're thrilled to be joined by Grant The Beat Bosnick, who's published the book Tailored Approaches to Self-Leadership, a bite-sized approach using psychology and neuroscience. Grant is a team productivity coach, the chief executive thinker of Yes, and he is an author, keynote speaker, consultant, and the founder of Upbeat. He's also getting quite good at self-promotion, I see.
Yeah.
Grant, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Joe and Andrea. Great to be here. And thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Joe. Yeah, and the book is doing well. It just came out at the end of September. It's all across the world now and several bookstores and Amazons. I'm doing quite well with it. Kino Cunha in Singapore has got it up on the highlight shelf. So, yeah, we're quite excited about that. And I'm now doing keynotes based on the book and getting amazing results from it from senior leaders. So quite excited about that. And I'm excited to be here with you on this show, too.
Well, I'm thrilled to have someone in the performance space who's actually using neuroscience, because there's so many people who just say, this is what you need to do. Why do you do it? I don't know. I saw some guy do it.
Yeah, I've been my background's in psychology from university back a long time ago, and then neuroscience probably over the last 10 years, and very fascinated with how the brain works in terms of living our lives more effectively, being more effective leaders. And as you can see, I'm got drums back there, which is where the beat comes from, Grant The Beat Bosnick, and applying neuroscience of drumming to help us to raise our game in our brain and take our attention from 70% up to 95% laser focus.
Well, we hope the rhythm of the show continues just fine. Tim's going to join us randomly when he finally gets home, puts on his pants and whatever else he needs to before he gets onto the show. But in the meantime, I just want to welcome everyone.
Pants for this?
No. Neither one of us.
Sit down.
We've told Tim something else in the memo. So I want to welcome everyone to the show, and what we try and do on the show is, first of all, cover some of the news that has been happening since the last show. It's been a very exciting week, and then we're going to come back at the end of this and talk about the theme of the show, which today is about the elections that went by in the U.S. and the hope that we have that comes out of the results.
Absolutely. There's so much hope. All right, let's kick off into the news, and we'll start with the funny. I haven't done that one for a while. France's mascot for the 2024 Olympics has been likened to a clitoris in trainers. Now, the feminists are celebrating this because finally people recognize what a clitoris looks like. But the mascot is it's called a red triangular phryges, and phryges is spelled Phryges, and it's meant to represent the floppy comical hats that were worn by the French revolutionaries. So I thought that was a pretty funny little story. But the US midterms, you just mentioned it, Joe, so it's over. The Republicans have gained control of the Senate, and the Democrats have retained control of the House. Hopefully in the Georgia runoff in December, they will get that extra seat, which will matter. But I just thought it was really funny today. This piece of news came out. The Republicans are obviously focused on the critical issues of our time because they announced their top priority is to probe the Biden family. Of course, Hunter's laptop, right? It wasn't the wave everybody expected, and we'll speak about this more in the demographic theme section. But my concern, of course, is that we're going to have a stalemate for the next couple of years, and this is at a time when we need to be really moving ahead on many of the critical issues that are facing the world. So, but of course, Trump's appointees got absolutely hammered and didn't get elected, which, you know, made me smile. But regardless, he's put his hat in the ring for 2024. I hope this is the end of him. I really do. And Rupert Murdoch, who I probably dislike more than I dislike Trump, has decided to abandon him. So I hope the media gets the message this time not to go all in. Like, I really do. Because I just, it's so depressing seeing him on the, I mean, it's depressing seeing Musk everywhere, right?
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I don't want to add a little bit to that, you know, the taste in your mouth, but there's also this little thing that someone reminded me about, as in, like, this is how it kind of began when Trump first ran. Everyone thought, no, he's not the guy. Everyone was against him. And that turned out a bit differently as well. But that's the way, you know, things sometimes work. But hopefully, like you said, someone has learned from their mistakes. I'm just going to grab hold of Tim's stuff here and talk about Twitter and Musk. It's been very hard to be on Twitter and not have comments about Musk flying left and right. Twitter itself trending on Twitter, which is always fun. Musk, the owner of Twitter, on that list as well. Of course, the big story has been, well, how the HR department has had to really go into overdrive at Twitter, where they've gone to some very interesting moves where they have fired someone and then almost immediately begged them to come back because they were important for some of the new features that Musk was trying to introduce.
Sorry, just another quick one. You know, he said, if you want to stay, we're going hardcore. And so today it's been announced that 50% of the employees have said they're going to go. So all those HR people getting sacked in all those other companies like Meta, maybe they should be going for a job at Twitter, because they're certainly going to need the HR teams.
Well, he's also, you know, the guy who's brought you driverless cars and reusable rockets is also bringing you back to full work days at the office, because he's just announced that he wants everyone to spend at least 40 hours in the office in person. I wonder why you can't trust people to look after themselves in the office when you're working under someone like that. The next bit is about Iran, which has entered into a third month of protests, which started with Mahsa Amini when she died after being in police custody. She was alleged to have been in breach of Iran's strict dress code for women, basically not wearing the hijab correctly. Security have opened fire on protesters, attacked women without hijab headscarves, and more. And while the unrest was fanned by fury over the brutal enforcement of the mandatory hijab law, it has grown into a broad movement against the theocracy that has ruled Iran since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Iran Human Rights said in an updated toll issued on Wednesday that security forces had killed at least 342 people, including 43 children and 26 women in the crackdown since Amini's death. The group said at least 15,000 people have been arrested, a figure that the Iranian authorities deny. And on Wednesday, a revolutionary court handed down 3 more death sentences meted out over what they call riots.
Yeah, that's got a long way to go. All right, Grant.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to follow news like that when there's so many people dying and you know, the human rights violations over.
Let me help you, Grant. Stories like that make you want to have a drink, don't they?
Oh yeah, okay. Well, I do have water here, but I did just recently see a Belvedere vodka commercial. I don't know if you've seen this yet or not, but Daniel Craig, who spent 15 years as 007, an amazing actor indeed, had a bit of fun with that Belvedere commercial. It was, and if you haven't seen it, do check it out. He's quite the dancer in there as well. That boy's got moves and he's got swag. You know, it's very sexy, very cool, and you might think twice about Daniel Craig now, you know, so amazing stuff that's going on there. You know, sticking with entertainment, because, you know, that is my scene. I am a semi-professional musician and music producer as well, too. And, you know, Jeff Bezos, a founder of Amazon, and a former CEO, but still chairman of the board there, founder of Amazon, has finally agreed to pledged most of his $124 billion fortune during his lifetime to give it away to charitable causes and well-to-do, or not well-to-do, well-needed establishments. He told CNN he would donate his wealth to fighting climate change and reducing inequity. He revealed his plan after donating $100 million to country music star and philanthropist Dolly Parton to use for charitable causes. And Dolly, of course, is delighted, very well deserved, and she herself is such an amazing woman and doing amazing work as well to herself.
I love Dolly.
So back to me with a story that you may have heard or heard the rumors of anyway. Apparently, crypto died these past few days. Well, let's not call it a death, but it was certainly a very bad day, literally, for crypto, where one of the exchanges melted down from several billions of dollars to zero in the one day. And it's the kind of thing that people were very, very shocked by because of the name and the brand that was in the middle of all this, which is FTX. For those of you who don't know, you may have heard of Binance, which is basically the world's biggest centralized crypto exchange. Well, the second biggest was basically FTX, and Binance had initially invested in it, and it was growing. It was big. You saw it on the dashboard of, I think it was Lewis Hamilton, as well as George Russell, as they drove their Mercedes-Benzes in F1. They were very, very much the most legit of all the central exchanges, to the point where they had premium level investors. All the people who previously said, you know what, crypto is not developed and secure and regulated enough to be something that we want to really invest serious money in, they all said yes to FTX, because FTX was all about doing it right, having the right kinds of things in place to regulate themselves and do all the stuff that it seemed like Binance couldn't do. So it all came to a big halt when it turned out that most of that most possibly wasn't true, that they really weren't the up and up people that they wanted to be, and that it was more a aspirational branding in light of what they were doing in the background. So the big thing that happened basically was FTX is what you call an exchange where people are supposed to be just, like trading their money. Think of it as where as maybe NASDAQ, or where all that trading is going on with all the different instruments. And there was this other company that they had, which was, I think it's Alameda. I can't remember the name of the company right now.
Yeah,
but
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Alameda.
Yeah.
That is a hedge fund that was linked to this company. And there's something very inherently wrong about that setup, which people came to think that it was kind of all right. It's a bit weird, but you know what, crypto, we're going to be okay with that. Imagine if NASDAQ set up a hedge fund and used NASDAQ information to trade the hedge fund. It would be able to basically play, against what's happening on the market, because crypto is very much in the open. The data is all there. You know what the transactions are. You know where the orders are. You have a hedge fund like Alameda basically trying to play. It's connected and playing the market on the inside. So that was a bit dubious. But the problem with it it all came to a head because of what Alameda was all about in the end. It wasn't as sophisticated a hedge fund as hedge funds usually are. And what they were basically doing is betting on what is colloquially known as shitcoins. Shitcoins are the altcoins of the altcoins, as in, like, you have Ethereum, which is the granddaddy of the altcoins, which is quite respectable. And then you have altcoins that you can't remember the name of because it's just one of those things that come up, right? Like Doge or something else that has maybe no reason to have any kind of value, but for some reason it all gets it all increases in value. So they were doing a lot of speculation on that, and they clocked up a lot of losses on that. And in the background, what they were doing was using FTX to prop up Alameda, and the whole, basically, house of cards came down when they couldn't keep it going. It was just not going to work out that way. All the people who were coming in to try and buy and help them out and all that, as soon as they found out what was going on and had any sense of what shenanigans were going on, just said, "No, sorry, we're not going to do it." So, in the very last minute, it looked like Binance was going to buy out FTX, but when they found out what was going on, they just said, "Nope." And when everybody heard that, it was basically a run on FTX, and that's the way that particular cookie crumbled. Now, is this the end of crypto as we know it? Well, here's the flip side of this. Right, we had something called the DeFi, the summer of DeFi last year, and what DeFi is basically an idea that comes about because we don't think that centralized exchanges can do the job as well as maybe just software that runs on certain rules. It's independent of what happens in a particular place. So what FTX has done is basically made the case even stronger that DeFi might be the ultimate answer, that we don't want to have centralized exchanges. We want to have decentralized exchanges that can somehow settle all the business of crypto in an open and transparent way so that it can't happen again. So while we're having a bad day, a season right now, as crypto is down and some are saying hasn't gone down as far as it can go, this may be the very reason why crypto will rise in a different and better way. It is the springtime that follows a very bad fire. I think that's how I would look at it. Am I bullish on crypto? Well, in 10 years, yes. For next year, maybe not.
Right. It's for some bizarre reason, I read so much about this world and I just can't get my head around it. But welcome, Tim. Good to have you here. All right, so we'll keep going with the news. So G20, we've got no time to cover that today, but there's obviously a lot going on in Bali, Indonesia right now, including the fact that the big holidays and the big brands are making lots of money and the local people are not because they're restricting access. But COP27, we're coming up this weekend, will be all about negotiations 24 hours a day. So, they're not going to get a lot of sleep. But it's been in the headlines, of course, and now the question being asked, is COP a flop? We've seen Joe Biden issue a global rally cry. We've seen more than 600 fossil fuel lobbyists attending, which is 25% more than before. Obviously, Coca-Cola sponsoring it, which created a lot of outrage. We've seen Egypt suppressing voices of protest. Al Gore, if you haven't had a chance, he ripped up the stage. But right now we're at the point where the first draft of the agreement is out, and apparently it's been compared to a long shopping list at the moment. So we're a long way off the answer. Greenpeace said what they're seeing so far is the highway to climate hell. Someone's moving their microphone around. It's making some noise. And the first draft is saying that they want to continue with the goal of 1.5 degrees. Well, the only way we can continue with that is that no more fossil fuel is extracted. But they're not even mentioning fossil fuels in the agreement because obviously the lobbyists are doing their job. So coal's mentioned, but the fossil fuel industry as a whole is not mentioned. So obviously the president, the Egyptian president, is urging negotiations to speed up, but the poor countries are slamming it because basically it's not addressing the financial issues that need to be addressed to help the poorest countries in the world. And we have to remember, and this is a message that's just not coming through in the media, if the wealthy countries can help the poorer countries, they will also help themselves, because then you won't have to deal with billions and billions of climate migrants. So, yeah, this weekend we should be hearing a lot more about it. But from all I'm reading and from all I'm seeing, another wasted year.
Right. Yeah, and
it sounds to me like COP isn't. Sorry, Grant, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tim. You had something to say about COP. Go ahead.
I was just going to say we seem to be saying the same thing every year. The lobbyists silence everybody. They talk for a bit, and nothing happens.
Yep.
Doesn't it feel like that?
Yep. No wonder the young people are giving up hope, right?
Or they're coming together to say and voting for change. That could be the possibility.
Yeah.
Because whatever that model isn't working.
Yeah, and that just there's just so many businesses and industries just holding on to the old way because they don't know how to transform into the new way. I mean, even the whole hydrogen conversation that's happening, it's paid for by the fossil fuel industry because it is part of the fossil fuel industry. But there's so many people talking about hydrogen not being the solution that's being marketed to us. So we could be wasting so much time on an energy revolution that's not going to deliver what it's promising, right? So it's Anyway, Grant.
I mean, one of the things I just read recently was Neste, who's the world's largest maker of reusable energy or refined reusable energy. They're teamed up with Coldplay, and I just read today that DHL's teamed up with Coldplay as well too to help create the world's most sustainable music tour in history, which I think would be fantastic if other bands get on the bandwagon as well too, and have these sustainable world tours. I mean, the amount of energy that rock bands use on tour is incredible, and to be able to use reusable energy or reusable fuels in the jets and in the land transport, electric vehicles on local sites as well too, is just a great move for Coldplay, and hopefully that other bands are going to get behind that as well too. And what I wanted to talk about is I mean, as we all know, we just hit 8 billion people in the world, and this is quite a remarkable stage. I do remember when we hit 7. I do remember when we hit less than that as well too in my own lifetime. And it's the media commentary and social media has been all over this here, and how can we feed this many people? We talk about the largest percentage of this is coming from Africa, whereas other countries had a declining fertility rate. It's growing. It's still large across Africa as well too. And if we go plant-based, possibly we can feed many more people as well. Most scientists are predicting that while a massive population at 8 million, it soon will start to decline, and that decline will never reverse. An article in the ABC states that we've already hit peak child. There'll never again be more children alive than there are today, with fertility rates plummeting across the globe. And I said those fertility rates are not evenly plummeting. So they are in most of the industrialized or the developed countries, they are plummeting. However, across Africa, they are still at a staggering rate. And that's where we've got the most people that probably need the food that we should get there. Homo sapiens, humans, we've roamed the earth for about 300,000 people. Our population grew slowly at first, estimated at about 230 million when Cleopatra died in the collapse of Egypt. The population then doubled by the Renaissance in 1500, doubled again in 1805. We hit the 2 billion mark just after the Great Depression in 1925, and it took only 35 years to get to that 3rd billion. Since then, the population has been rising by another billion every 10 to 15 years, and the world's likely to have a couple more billion mouths to feed in just a few decades, with UN's latest projections suggesting we'll get to 9.7 billion by 2050. So the number of mouths are feeding, and those population growths are not evenly distributed across the globe. As I said, Africa is hitting peak records, whereas other industrialized developed countries are actually having some negative increase, some decrease in populations.
Before we hand over to Tim for that interesting news that comes out of China, I just want to add one thing. I love statistics like this to go with the population, hitting 8 billion people in the world. Apparently, there's a 17% chance that the 8th billionth person on Earth was actually a child of Herschel Walker, which is a funny joke only if you know what's happening in Georgia and the U.S. right now.
Oh yeah, the Netflix series or something, isn't it?
No, he's the Republican. He's the candidate that basically is anti-abortion, who is basically stands with a bunch of women saying that, well, he's had many children with many women and also paid for many abortions by these women, and actually driven them to the location and waited for them for the job to be done, and then compensated them in cash.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
great guy.
Sounds amazing. No, there was a Netflix series about some doctor in a fertility clinic that instead of using the donor sperm that the person had selected, he used his own for everyone who came in. So all these children in this city are his, which means a lot of them over 40-year period have been marrying each other, and there's a problem.
Oh, oh, oh
Because
dear.
they're all in different families and they don't know it's from him.
Yeah.
So there's a series about it. I've only watched the trailer, but it looked disturbing enough that I thought it might have been that guy. But okay, no.
Well,
What's it called? Who's Your Daddy?
And
I
a
think they
horrible
know who
joke
the
to go
daddy
with that
is,
is
but that's a
the
good
name
one.
of the show is actually Arkansas, the origin story.
Well, there you go.
Okay, I'll have to look out for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want me to, have you talked about Iran already?
Yeah.
At the
So
beginning? Okay, so I'll talk about China. So something unusual happened this week. There were protests in China. Well, there has been protests in China before, and we all probably remember those with tanks and single people standing in front of them. But anyway, crowds of residents in southern China's industrial metropolis of Guangzhou have escaped a compulsory lockdown and clashed with police as anger at more strict coronavirus curbs boiled over. So dramatic footage shows some tearing down COVID control barriers, and riot teams are now being deployed in the area. Tensions had been building in the city's Haichu district, as it's home to many of the poorer itinerant laborers. They've complained of not being paid if they're unable to turn up for work, and of food shortages and skyrocketing prices while living under COVID control measures. So it's keep an eye on that one, because there's a boiling pot there. It's either going to be crackdown or trigger worthy for something, and more likely the former.
Yeah, there's also some conspiracy theories starting to brew. There's one group or one town or region where apparently they're letting COVID run rampant so that they can see what the impact on the community is going to be, so that they can work out whether or not they can release, do the same thing across the rest of China. So, yeah, just a couple of things a couple of quick ones we haven't got time to talk about. Last week, in the weekend reads, is soaring methane emissions raise stakes for Asia at COP27. And this is in Asia Nikkei, and I really recommend it. This is talking about how natural methane release is now occurring at an extraordinary rate because of global warming. We now have this warming from methane. Another article, Joe, you've definitely got to read this. What is the true cost of climate change? And this is in a magazine called An Open Mind. And it talks about how basically the global economists have got climate change wrong in a very, very, very big way. They basically said, we can do 4 degrees. It won't really hurt us that much. So that's an interesting one. A Guardian long read, How to Move a Country, Fiji's radical plan to escape rising sea levels. Absolutely fascinating. And the final one is Subarctic boreal forest, vital for the planet, is at risk. So these are really, really big stories that are going on out there. So I just recommend having a look.
All these, by the way, are part of Andrea's weekend reads. It's absolutely one of the best places to just come and get all that stuff all at once. You do so much work. You should be a news organization yourself.
Trying to make sense of the world. All right, so let's go on to the theme, and we're just going to say hi to Shah. Hello, darling. One of our wonderful members of our community. Okay, demographics. So the first thing I want to cover is, every time I talk about demographics, people say to me, I don't know what generation I come from, right? Okay, so you're part of the silent generation if you were born before 1945. You're a boomer if it's 1946 to 1964. You're Gen X, 1965 to 1980. So I'm presuming we're all Gen X, right? Yeah.
Still sounds pretty hip these days.
Yeah. We are totally. We are the hippest. Millennials or Gen Y, 1981 to 1996, and Gen Z is 1997 and beyond, right? So for those who don't know, I've always been a bit of a demographics dork. And the reason I am a demographics dork is because I found out that as a Gen X, I would not have more voting power than my parents until 2028. So my vote essentially wouldn't matter until I was 58 years old. And that's never happened in history, right? That sort of segmentation. At school, and I'd love to know if it was the same for you guys, as a Gen X, we always heard that our generation, would have to carry the financial burden of supporting an aging boomer generation. that message that I remember very clearly at school, it never focused on the other very important side, which is, of course, voting. And boomers have dominated the world's voting since the 60s. Boomers are impacting many, many areas of our lives, and not all in a good way. And trust me, I like boomers. But with voting, as people get older, they get more conservative, even if they start off as working class. And that's something I've always found really interesting, right? So when everyone today speaks to me of the challenges of democracy, I believe that we have a challenge of demographics, and we have for a long time. So the good news is, and this is where the hope is, the boomer domination is now over. And like I said, don't get me wrong, I do not have anything against boomers. They're not bad people. They just have different priorities. So the Australian election earlier this year, and then after that, there was a new census that was released. Gen Z and millennials are now equal to boomers in size and in voting power. And what I found really interesting about watching the Australian election was the Liberals or Conservatives in Australia, they were still focusing all of their messaging on the boomers. And it was really obvious to me that they'd missed this demographic shift in the voting bloc. Then again, maybe for us Gen Xers, now that they're equal on both ends, maybe us it's sitting in the middle, maybe we finally do have some power because we can be the deciding vote. But regardless, to the young people out there, please vote. Obviously in countries like Australia, it's compulsory, but you guys finally have the power, and this is power we've never had. So please, when you vote, vote for me too. But looking at the US midterms, and I'll hand it over to you guys, much is being made of the youth vote, and especially what happened is because of the youth. And a lot of that was going on TikTok. And even Texas has basically said they want to raise the voting age to 21. They do like that voter suppression, right? Around the world, countries are saying we should reduce the voting age. Is that the right word? Reduce to 16. Yeah. And I think that's absolutely spot on because it's their future. So I think it's a really important milestone for humanity. 2022 is the year. So much is going on in 2022 that's catastrophic. But to me, the hope is the fact that the young people have got a voice now, and their voice matters. And if we can convince them to get out there and use their voice, especially with voting, I think we've got a chance. So I don't think we could have a better time for humanity than for this demographic shift to be finally happening. So over to you guys.
Well, I think there's been a big change in how things have looked at the elections because of how people actually turn up for elections right now. Because you're talking about how as you grow up, you change what you are. I heard one description this week, which I thought is just perfect. We're all born Democrats and we die Republicans. Yeah. It's kind of our priorities do shift that way. Yeah. One of the big problems has always been, and this is much more in countries where elections or voting is not compulsory, is voter turnout. In terms of it's not just a demographic, but it's also what happens when you have an opportunity to vote.
All right, can I just quickly jump in there, right? So yeah. Voter turnout is Yuval Noah Harari was talking about. He doesn't understand what happened, right? So the countries that have compulsory votes, the countries that don't have compulsory votes, were all voting the same way, because even in the countries with compulsory votes, they didn't have the numbers demographically. Yeah. So to me, that argument has never held any sway because it's just a generational thing. And it's a numbers game, and older people tend to vote. But in a country like Australia, where everyone's required to vote, there was a mass registration of voters in Australia for not the election just gone, but the one before, where they registered to vote in the referendum on LGBTQ's right to marry. Mm-hmm. And then the election that followed, they didn't vote. Yeah. And then, of course, they get fined for that. But it's this election where their numbers have mattered. So just wanted to clarify that point.
Because they realize they're going to get fined.
No,
yeah, but it's not much. It's $20, right?
Yeah, no, I completely understand the idea about the demographics and showing up, but there are certain things, certain shifts that happen where, like, for instance, when Obama ran, what happened was the voter turnout changed what would have been the demographic, or what would have been the regular result. So yes, there is. If we're talking about how it's totally expressed in the opinion, there would be some semblance in terms of a leaning towards the older audience, but there has been for the longest time. Young people just saying, it's no point. We'll make the noise, but it's not much point participating in the actual thing.
Mhm.
More people are showing up right now, and it makes a difference. So maybe prematurely as well, because if you look at what happened in the U.S., it is actually because a younger audience showed up, that it was close enough to be pushed over the edge, because it's an unprecedented midterm election results. Only the second time since the 1940s where the representation in the House hasn't flipped in opposition to who the president is. It's always happened in reverse in the U.S. It's happened every single time since 1945, except for 2 occasions, and this is one of them. And this time around, when they look at the numbers, they were surprised by how many young people showed up, because the big criticism has always been that they complain, they make noise, and they don't really act. And this time around, I think that the voting message came through. The other thing I was thinking about is how how I think a lot of the world actually kind of had some idea how a tsunami works, and once it didn't really sink in until a really big one happened, and then people began to change what they did. And I think what happened in terms of the US, enough of a tsunami happened to them in terms of the economy and everything else to kind of wake people up just a little bit enough to go like, maybe this craziness with conspiracies and stuff like that isn't going to solve the problem that we have, and maybe we need to just go with a bit of sanity for a while. So that's my little theory about what happened with the US. They were woken up by a tsunami, not necessarily of a political kind, but more the economy and everything else.
Yeah, Roe versus Wade, all that sort of stuff. But the percentage of millennials that voted was exactly the same number as the percentage of boomers that voted. And that's the first time that's ever happened. And that didn't even include Gen Z. So I thought that was interesting. Grant, from a Canadian perspective, I know you've been looking at it.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because, I don't know if you guys know where the word Generation X comes from. Do you know where that term comes from? It was a Canadian author that coined the term, Douglas Copeland. So he wrote the book called Generation X. And it was really because the baby boomers had a name, and our generation, which became Generation X, didn't have a name. So Douglas Copeland, a Vancouver author, coined the term Generation X. And one of the key points of around being Gen X was a sense of apathy, that we didn't care, but it made us some of the most resilient people on the planet because we didn't care. And I remember when I turned 18 and I was allowed to vote, I went and cast an empty ballot because I didn't care. I didn't care who it was, whether it was this person or that person. Well, you guys are the same. It doesn't matter to me. That was kind of my little silent protest. One of the things that I liked, having prepared for this call here and having seen these record numbers of millennials and Gen Z coming out there as well too to vote, is they are giving me more hope that I want to go out and vote now too. I think that what they are doing is, and I like that point that you brought, is Gen X. We don't talk about record number Gen X coming out because they don't. And I think that maybe if these younger people, one of the reasons I think Gen X didn't vote was because, the boomers were crushing everything and we didn't want to follow in their footsteps. So we were like, hey, we're going to be Gen X. We're not going to really care about anything. We're going to feel apathetic. Singles, the movie Singles, if you've seen that one, kind of summed up what Gen X was about. And I thought, okay, that movie just marks my generation right there. The Seattle grunge scene, the, singles, and we don't care. We all study philosophy and we're here to be smart, and that's it. We don't care what happens in the world. But what I like about millennials and the Gen Z, one of my clients was down in Australia. He interviewed 20 young people. He's the MD of a major global bank, and he interviewed 20 young people down in Australia for leadership positions. The kind of questions they're asking him: what's your stance on diversity? What's your stance on hybrid working? What's your stance on the environment? And Gen X, when I was interviewing for jobs before I started my own company, I never asked these questions. I was like, okay, what do I get out of this? And I love the fact that the millennials and Gen Z, that they want to know what is the company's view on social impact and the civic society as well too. And these record numbers coming out to vote, And even the numbers, not just with young people, but in terms of even the more diverse, educated population among the Hispanics and the people of color in the U.S. are even more swaying their votes towards the Democrats. And that's one of the differences, I think, now is we've got a much larger, diverse, educated population of the young people voting.
Yeah, absolutely. The New York Times always does a really good demographic breakout after elections, if you want to have a look at it. The black vote, so there was a really interesting piece called Blacks for Trump. Did you guys see that this week? And as a demographic, they're becoming much more powerful. And of course, they're also in the areas where voter suppression activities are really taking place, which I just find completely disgusting. You know, if you're going to be a democracy, let people vote. And by the way, up until 2022, it didn't really matter. You know, you already had enough boomers to be voting, so you didn't need to do that. But yeah, the Blacks for Trump. So basically, they didn't show up because they were not allowed in Mar-a-Lago when he did his putting his hat in the ring speech. So I just, yeah, why would you be for him? Yeah, I just don't get it. Yeah, Tim.
Well, I got two sort of skeptical comments. One comment is sort of an observation that all these young generations are inspiring and protesting and asking great questions until they get a mortgage. And at that point, everything goes down to playing the game that they're told to play. That's a bit of a sort of a pessimistic view of how economics traps people and keeps you within a category, and then you're fighting. And in the US, they've got to pay off their student debt. So they're already launched into horrendous debt from the outset. And while they may be doing this, at some point, once they've got a mortgage or a kid on the way, things start to change. I think. Hopefully, though, that this groundswell based on numbers is going to be the interesting player. And Andrea, you said something before. I know you were making a point, but where you said your vote didn't count because the boomers did. I mean, that's not really true. You know, if 60% of the boomers voted for something and 40% voted for the other, and you were voted with the 40%, if there was enough of the didn't counters to vote with the 40%, we can still make a difference. The other thing I wanted to mention was that this entire conversation about baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, millennials is, except for perhaps the millennials side, is very post-World War II allied terminology. And what I mean by that is it's not all countries had the same experience of baby boom and then the next generation after them and then the next generation after them. So we just need to be a little bit careful. I've got a bunch of stats in front of me, for example. Not everyone calls them the traditionalists and the baby boomers and the Gen X and Gen Y. This is something I talked about at some conference about 8 years ago. India calls them different. It's what's happening contextually in that particular country. So India was the freedom fighters. They weren't the traditionalists. Then there was the free generation, and then they've adopted Gen X and Gen Y. And the thing about the adopting Gen X, Gen Y, and millennials, sort of those sorts of terminologies later, is because of globalization. And because globalization happens and the media becomes sort of ubiquitous and everywhere, and we're all seeing the same stuff, we're all having a same emotional impact to a significant event. So these generations are basically having their mindset set based on significant events that are happening in their youth or their life. The baby boomers the traditionalists think the way they do because of what was going on in their youth and the risks that they had to put up with. The baby boomers had come immediately after Second World War, and so they were in this huge building phase in the Allied victors part. But in places like Japan, there was this sustained nothing for a while, which is why Japan's always in recession right now, because they didn't have the demographic leap that everybody else had, which meant that they had an older generation far faster than everybody else. If you want to look at what's going to happen to everybody who's got more old people than they have younger people, stuff that's happening in Japan would give you a signal. But wealthy countries like and aspirational countries like the US or potentially Australia, where people want to go there. They want to go there to work. They can solve, even Singapore, they can solve that problem by allowing immigrants to come in. And skilled immigrants come in, they fill out the graph. If you go and have a look at the CIA World Fact Book, so it's called, well, you just look up cia.gov and type in World Fact Book. It's got pretty much census data across all these different countries, and it shows you the population demographic across different countries in different parts of the world. And you can see the global demographic. A lot of young people, not as many older people, but you look at a place like US where they've got better healthcare, the older people are living a lot longer, and that's why versus somewhere in the Congo or something. I mean, I'm saying the Congo. I look at the stats, maybe it's different, or even the Philippines. There's a lot more young people, but they're not surviving as much. So we got to be. I guess my point is we got to be a bit mindful that not everybody had the same experience. For example, Japan, they've got the generation titles are like the Danso generation. They did have a baby boom. They had a little baby boom after the Second World War, but it only went for a little while. Then there was this Danso generation, then the Shinjunri generation. But then from the 71 to 75, they had what they called a second baby boom. And you remember in the 70s, Japan was the language to learn. I mean, I grew up in Malaysia. It was the language of business. It was the language of Asia. It was the language to learn over in Asia. China was nothing at the time. They were still the sleeping giant. And so Japan was getting a lot of wealth coming in after the restoration and everybody set up to increase their business and basically, trade. So these sorts of things, and then they've got post-bubble generation and a few other generations. So you can align them, and I think more recently everybody's the same. But I think back 40 years ago, what we would call baby boomers, around about that time and immediately after, those two generations, which would be baby boomers and Gen X, early Gen X, but the baby boomers in particular aren't the same everywhere. They are pretty much the same in Britain, America, Canada, Australia, those allied forces type places. Because when you win a war, everybody goes, woohoo, you're pillaging the place that lost. You all have babies. Everybody's great. But the place that lost is a bit miserable and they're struggling to survive.
Yeah. I think that you're absolutely correct. And there has been an alignment. So the years of Gen X millennials in Asia and Africa, the years are actually a little bit further forward than what we have, just to make up for the differences culturally. But the countries, the allies who you were talking about, they have dominated the global agenda from a business perspective as well for the last 40, 50 years, right? And the position that we are finding ourselves in now in the world is because of what happened in that period of time.
I mean,
right?
with the conversation with regards to the elections in the US, absolutely. I mean, we're talking the right language with baby boomers, Gen X. The one I just wanted to mention quickly was the Chinese titles, the Chinese ones that they've given everybody, which I would just love you to guess what the Chinese titles for like the baby boomers were. Just guess.
Something to do with Mao.
Well, I would have thought the same thing, but they went the other way. They went with the traditionalists, going back a generation. The traditionalists were called post-30s, post-40s. The baby boomers, post-50s, post-60s. Gen X, post-60s, post-70s. Millennials, post-80s, post-90s. Gen Y, millennials, Gen Y, and then there's this one. They got a bit creative all of a sudden. They've called them little emperors, which is really interesting. It's this entitlement mentality. If you think what a little emperor is, it's I mean, we'd called Zoe her royal smallness for a long time because she would command things and we'd all do her beckoning do to her will. But yeah. Anyway, so there's a whole bunch of them.
Sorry, Tim.
I was just going to say one of the Russian generations, the later millennials, Gen Y, is called Generation PU, which sounds a little bit.
One of the things
missing
I
a
was
can.
curious about, I mean, I'm conscious of the time now, so I wanted to get your thoughts on this as well too, because there was a record number of voters in the U.S. for the midterm elections, and as you pointed out, Andrea, there's been record numbers in Australia for young voters. So, being a Canadian, I've been overseas now for 24 years. I was curious what Canadians are doing, and it seems to be an opposite trend. There's fewer young people going out to vote, and World Vision Canada says that youth in Canada are the most politically vocal. They are not wielding power by voters' ballots every 4 years, but rather engaging politically 24/7 using social media. In fact, half of the young people between 15 and 30 signed an internet petition in the last year. Almost a quarter of them expressed views on an issue on an online forum, making youth the most politically active age group online. And I read something about that the youth in Australia were also feeling a kind of what's the word, distrust of the traditional political system and taking action more on a daily basis in terms of social media and civic society. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. If this is a trend for younger people, that it's going to be more about daily social interaction and daily social media and online petitions and online internet forums. I mean, what is that going to say if they're not actually caring as much about voting, but more on a daily basis in terms of political activeness?
So there's one of the things that came through in the midterms is the first Gen Z person has been elected somewhere in Florida.
Yeah. Maxwell Frost, and he's a person of color too.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a big story.
Yeah.
But the kids don't trust the institutions, and the institutions are failing. The medical infrastructure is failing, the legal infrastructure is failing, the governments are failing, and obviously the media is a huge part of that. But up until recently, it didn't matter if they voted because it wouldn't make any difference in the outcome because there weren't enough of them. Now that there's enough of them, we've got to be saying to them, like, not just vote, but become a politician or put your people forward. So we're on the cusp of a radical transformation, I think, globally, of not in countries like China, of course. I don't know if you've been watching some of the coverage that's coming from Z out of Bali. He's having some very, very interesting conversations. Apparently China and Australia are friends again, but Trudeau did get a bit of a kick in the ass for revealing a confidential conversation between the two. But it looks like he's on the world stage and trying to build friendships again. He's meeting with Biden. So, but I just think it's time for the youth of the world to stop feeling hopeless and start getting active, because it's your future now, and you're in control. And I'm here to support whatever you guys want to do. I hope the rest of us are. I think Boomers should vote and Gen X should vote the way the young people ask us to vote. Because if we don't, the Republicans and the right wing right now are not looking in the right direction as far as the emergencies that the world is facing. So we need to be looking where we, and whether that's Democrats, Labor, whatever you call them, or Green parties, which we saw a massive rise in the Green Party in Australia. So alternative sort of political groups, that's on the agenda now. So I don't know. I think.
Well, I think stuff like this, right? Like what happened to crypto recently is the kind of thing that's going to happen to political systems, right? We're trying to revamp the political system and say this doesn't work, right? I mean, I have a politician in office, and he's from my party, and even if I voted for him, he's not doing what I want him to do right now. So the alternate universe in terms of crypto could be where everyone has digital currency that they can create their votes and express their opinions on in real time, and actually have what's happened to. DeFi basically is to say, okay, let's not have bankers involved in banking. Let's just have the process there in place. That's the concept. What if politics was without politicians as well? Right? What if there was a way for us to have things happen because we can all decide easily and in some kind of a fluid and transparent way? I mean, just imagine if there was 5 minutes a day when you could sit down, everybody just had quiet time, and 15 different problems that the world is facing right now is going to come up on the screen, and we all collectively go like, I think we should do that, right? And then,
okay.
I like it.
You got to watch an episode of The Orville I think I talked about this once before, where they all just vote on everything based on their phone, and
Yeah,
they judge and trial people. So then the legal system goes down that line as well. What do you think of this?
Yeah.
What do you think of Grant? Oh, I don't like his
Yeah.
beard.
Yeah.
Guilty, and then, and then it's like, so there. Joe, I would love to see some sort of political shakeup, but at the moment, it doesn't. We're not seeing an ideology or a system of government that seems to be, has been presented to us, that seems to have been better than the ability for the people to vote for a candidate.
Well, I mean, I'll just speak back
You
to
know.
that very quickly, because I was listening about to the U.S. and the trouble that they had in Ohio specifically, because that's all I had the information about, right? Gerrymandering, just the whole idea of that you have a system where you just vote representatives, but I get to decide where the lines are drawn, right? And that is something that whoever is in power tends to do to try to retain power. And in a sense, if you think what you're doing is right, you have an obligation to try and retain power so you can continue to do what's right. That's the irony of it, right? But I think there's also a desire for fairness, and if there was a mechanism through which fairness could be expressed. So this is why something that is in a crypto, again, I'm speaking like one of those crypto prophets, right? But basically, if you can just imagine this, where if we say truly democracy counts, and then we have a system which is immutable, where like a blockchain, and we can see everybody's votes, we can see what you vote, we can talk about the history. You're not going to vote secretly as well, because why make things secret? Why not just make it all something that we can say, or there's a way for us to express ourselves, and let's be honest about what we really think and need and whatever it is. And if that could all happen, if the idea why I said 5 minutes of our time is like, you don't want to be in a situation where you're making decisions all the time, all day. But you know what? Here's 15 things we need to work out on, and it's in your area, and therefore you get to decide. Can't
we all just give our vote to you, Joe, and you vote for us, since you seem to be interested in this?
No, but you know what I think you're really getting to a point. So we're on the cusp of I believe, like a complete revolution of how our countries operate, and we have to. It's either going to be destroyed or it's going to rise, right? One way or another, it's going. But one of the things is true collaboration. We're part of it, and technology, that's a potential that it offers, right? But the other side is the rise of citizen assemblies. Have you guys seen any of the stuff around? Like France had a citizens assembly, and they came up with all these recommendations, and the government didn't follow all of them, but did follow some of them. And I just saw there's a citizen assembly protest going on somewhere, but it's basically a group of people from representing all of the different demographics come together, and they nail out the biggest issues. So I think we're on the cusp of something fairly extraordinary. Whether it's positive or negative is to be seen, but I don't know. I'm hopeful for the future. I think, just today, Lloyd's Bank Group have said that they will no longer fund any fossil fuels, right? So, and that's a result of Just Stop Oil, So, there's a lot of big things happening in the world right now, and I think keeping our hope alive. And I think older people are also saying, we're screwed. What can we do to help? So there's more coming together. The elections, Brazil, US. One of the articles in the Weekend Reads is about the next election in the UK will be a millennial election. There's a lot of shifts happening, and so hang on to your hat. Some crazy times ahead, one way or another.
Yeah.
My skeptical brain says Lloyd's Bank, was it? My skeptical brain says, give it about 10 months and we'll find out that they've been secretly sponsoring them anyway. But
obviously.
that, you know what that is? That's a mindset based on a bunch of being let down over the last 20, 30 years by this sort of whitewashing, greenwashing, lobbying and everything else. Whereas the millennials and those guys haven't had 30 years of that. So they're still hugely hopeful that these sorts of things are going to change. So the Grant was saying, oh, maybe I checked out because I was a Gen X, and I went into, don't care mode. If people are going to do this, fine. But so what's interesting is if I can acknowledge the fact that my mindset has led me to think in a particular way, can I acknowledge the fact that there is an opportunity for hope, that there is an opportunity for a different way forward, that there is an opportunity that that group of people can make a difference if we allow them to. I don't think, saying I think baby boomers should vote for whatever the millennials tell them to, I don't think that'll happen in a bazillion. If I think about my father, for example, it's not going to happen.
Just enough of them.
I completely agree. I mean, as a Gen Xer who pretty much spent most of my life not really caring that much, I am inspired by young people caring a lot, and it's making me want to go vote. I mean, if we were to put this in a net promoter score, I'd be a 7 or an 8, but I'm looking at becoming a 9 or a 10 now. I want to be that that promoter. I mean, I'm finding that the fact that young people are asking these questions to the companies, what's your stance on the climate? What's your stance on diversity and inclusion? And this is that's helping companies to change, and it's making me want to change too. And I think this is inspiring, and hope that more Gen Xers like myself, who spent many years not really caring, do care more, and we do go out and vote and then we vote in the ways that are going to be in positive for the environment, positive for the world as well too.
You know what Andrea said before about how we should vote, as in, like, we should let the kids tell us how we should vote. I mean, it's something that happened in our household for a while because there was only one qualified voter in our entire household. Everybody else was too young, all Malaysian like myself. And Adel would actually ask, how should I vote based on everybody else's thoughts? And I just thought that actually is a really good thing. And it's an idea, it's a very interesting idea. It's like, maybe at some level there should be something where we go like, okay, if you're going to vote, ask yourself, first of all, am I qualified to vote? And qualifying to vote means I know what I'm voting about.
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the fact you said ask yourself that rather than it be something that is put in place where if you have an IQ below this, you're not allowed to vote. I don't like that sort of mindset at all because I think intelligence comes in many forms and you need all forms of intelligence represented. Growing up in Australia where, in the 70s and the 80s, there were a lot of people doing the fake votes like you were talking about, Grant. And there was a massive campaign in Australia to say, no, don't waste your vote. Your vote matters. And if you talk to any Australian, they will tell you that your vote matters. And Australians are really passionate about it. The last election, I was reading, it was like 96, 97% of people voted. And yes, it's compulsory. The fine's not that massive. But Australians really care about it. I mean, the referendum on the right to marry, that had it's like 70, 80% vote. When you didn't even have to vote, so Australians, we kind of, so I suppose it's more about, we've got to get the message out about the importance of voting.
Well, even
your vote matters, right?
Even for Canadians, overseas Canadians were not allowed to vote for Canadian elections until a couple of years ago. And there's 1 million overseas. We've only got a population of 30 million in our country, in Canada. I've been overseas for 24 years, and I wasn't allowed to vote until about 3 or 4 years ago. Then they allowed the overseas Canadians to vote in Canadian elections. And that's 1 million people out of 30 million that can, or 30 million total population. That's 1 million people overseas that, out of a voting population. That's a significant amount. I mean, allow people overseas that are citizens of countries to vote for their own country's elections.
I 100% agree. I put it on my list of 2 things to say, because overseas, in Australia, for example, I can vote while I'm overseas, but I'm voting as a resident of a place in Australia, and if I'm not a resident, then I shouldn't be voting anymore. Something like that. So it's. That one to me doesn't make any sense. I'm still a passport holder. I get it that I'm not paying taxes in that jurisdiction. I get it that I'm not, because they've got some agreement from wherever I am. I get it that the politician can't come and shake my hand and kiss my baby. But I do reject the fact that I shouldn't have a say in my country's future. And so I think Canada's done the right thing. And it was probably politically motivated, going, I reckon these 1 million will vote for us more than they'll vote for them. Let's make this law so that they can. But it's still the right thing to do. My second point was, I would encourage anyone listening to consider being a swinger, baby, which means which means
Wrong
which
show,
means-
Tim.
yeah, which means be open to being a swinging voter, which basically means you haven't bought into one party's ideology. You're willing to listen to what people have to say and what they stand for the next 4 years, so that we're not voting because we're told to, because that's the color of the shirt we wear. We're voting because we're thinking and we're considering the argument and the plan that particular group has. So, you know what I mean?
Yes.
I know exactly what you
mean.
mean, and I'm going to hold you to it the next time we sit down and watch a match between Manchester United and any other team.
Hey, I bought a membership to Manchester City once because I lost a bet with Tom Abbott, actually, about finishing my book in time, and so I had to quickly become a member of Manchester United before joining Manchester City. But if I could find the picture that I used for my membership card, I've got wigs and hats and teeth and everything to disguise myself, but it's a good one.
Anyway, Clinton is commenting from Melbourne, and I just want to say, Clinton, you're far nicer about Trump. I have other wishes for him, but we won't go there. Anyway, so young people, vote. We've got a whole new world. We've got a whole new world to rebuild. You know, we've got to fix what's broken, and we've got to transform what we've already got. So you guys got the power now. You got the voice. Use it. Believe it. All right. What's keeping you guys distracted?
Well, every now and then I just call up big random lists of TV shows, and I found one which surprised me, right? So there are all kinds of reboots, of old shows from the 80s and 90s. And I wonder if you remember Quantum Leap.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So Quantum Leap, nice idea. A guy goes from body to body, solving problems in that particular era. Great show as a premise, and now it's been rebooted. And what is significant for me about this particular reboot is that in a show that is on US prime time, the lead character is Dr. Song, an Asian Chinese, in a big sci-fi, universe world, and it's quite different. I mean, it's a refreshing thing to see. I must say I'm pretty agnostic about all these things, but I just thought as a data point, it is it's really
that is a quantum leap, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is a bit, yes.
That's good. It's good. It's how China would solve all the problems of the world in other people's bodies.
Well, what I liked, when you said these revitalized shows from the 90s, I mean, we started watching Seinfeld, and I watched Seinfeld in the 90s. And then my wife had never watched it before. And then we started watching comedians in cars getting coffee. And we just think that's hilarious. There's some nice jokes in there. So we brought up Seinfeld back up to watch. One of the things I realized in watching Seinfeld on Netflix, it's the only show that I don't have to enter my security code to watch. So it means it's child friendly, It's all the other ones I watch, and, whatever those ones are. I mean, like Dahmer or, I don't know what else is in there. Breaking Bad and these other ones, Better Call Saul, and everything else. Everything else you need to enter a code to get in there. But Seinfeld, you don't need. It's clean humor. It's timeless. It's 20 years old. It is timeless humor all the time.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's about people and our idiosyncrasies.
It's about life. It's about daily life,
Yeah. Pretzels are making me thirsty. What else keeping you busy? What's keeping you busy, Andrea?
Oh, so you haven't got something that's keeping you busy?
Oh yeah, I got something. So I mean, for me,
learning Hebrew.
Well, no, that's I passed that by the skin of my teeth, which was good.
Good on you.
Say that in Hebrew. Come on, my friend.
Huh?
Yoda.
I know Yoda. Toda. It's Toda. I said Yoda. See, I even got that wrong. Yoda, Star Wars, of course. But I've been, I'm still writing assignments. I've got one due in today, which is about exegesis, about interpretation of a particular Psalm 22, and then I've got a week to finish my history paper, and so that goes in. But what's keeping me excited is after that, there's that month in Europe, and we get to have cold weather Christmas and catch up with my brothers who I haven't seen. One of them I haven't seen for 3 years plus. Nice. And their families, which I haven't seen for the 3 years plus, both of them. So that'd be great to catch up with them. A whole clan going over, and so we're excited by that. A little bit nervous. We're going nuts at Uniqlo, buying lots of fluffy things.
Come on, that's a fast fashion business. Go elsewhere.
I've still got the jacket that I used to go to Everest, and that was one of theirs. So I think they're a little bit more longevity now with some of their stuff.
All right.
So, and they got a recycling campaign too, which is nice in store.
Yeah. So this is actually Tim's last show for the year because he's going to be off, and then I've just found out Joe's going to be off for a couple of weeks. So I'm going.
Just a week.
Yeah,
okay. Grant's done a good job. We can bring Grant back.
Yeah, you can come back and be a co-host, Grant. So I've come across this absolutely fascinating show on Netflix, and it's called Ancient Apocalypse, and really, really, really want to encourage everyone to watch it. And if you want to get a feel for what a global calamity looks like, this is the show that will give you a sense of all those climate predictions and those tipping points coming together and creating something truly global. Yeah, it's illustrated in this show. But so there's this guy called Graham Hancock, and he is an investigative reporter. God, I can't even say it. And he loves archaeology. And basically, he's been trying to find out if the history of humankind dates back further than what archaeologists say it does, right? And the archaeologists hate him, they mock him, they laugh at him, and it's been very difficult for him to get sort of global attention. So he's done this show, and I have to give you a couple of caveats. It's incredibly corny. You know when you watch a show. It's like, sort of wistfully looking off into the distance sort of moments. You know how, like, every show you watch now, there's a group of people walking in slow motion. You know how that's being overused? Yeah, so there's a lot of that, a lot of drama that doesn't need to be there. But it's a really fascinating insight into a possibility of human history that, so my brother was giving me a piece of history once about Aboriginal history, and I said, that's not right. And he goes, well, I learned it at school. And I'm like, yeah, but history always changes, right? And he goes, so how can history change? And I said, because we keep discovering new things and different interpretations, different people have different ideas, Anyway, so this to me is on so many levels, but one of the things that I love about it is it's astronomy, mythology, and archaeology all put together, and that's what the archaeologists don't like. So all the mythology, there's consistent mythology around the world about these stories. And, when you start to see consistency, you start to go, wait a minute, did something happen? So anyway,
yep.
Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix, absolutely recommend it. I've got the last one to watch tonight. And that's what caused, and the conclusion is what caused the last calamity.
What was the last calamity?
Well, based on what he's found and the evidence that he's reporting on, and sometimes it can feel a little bit tenuous.
The 2016 elections, right?
No. Not asteroid, a comet crashing into Earth.
Right.
And we've got plenty of examples of that having happened, but this one's the big one.
I did a paper last year on the flood and the Noah's flood, and so when I went in to look at flood myths around the world, there were flood myths in the Americas. There were flood myths with the Aboriginals in Australia as well, where they were coming over. In according to this myth, it sounded like they were walking across from Africa, and which I don't quite know how that happened, but it sounded like that. They're walking across.
Yeah. So the ocean level. So that's what you'll love this. The ocean level was so much lower because of the ice age, because of course, so when the ice melt, water expands, but when the ice, wait a minute, when I'm going around the other way.
Other way around, the ice expands.
The other side, so all this land was connected to each other. So there's all these archaeological sites all around the world that shows proof of an advanced society.
Okay.
And we think we're the most advanced society. So it's like, and he believes that these structures, these megalithic structures, were a warning to the world.
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
Well, even the Inuit of northern Canada and the Ainu of northern Japan are very, very similar. So they must have been, they were part of the same civilization, I believe. When there was ice age out there.
Yep.
Yeah, it was the Pangea side of things when everything was Gondwana-landish. People were roaming about possibly. But yeah, I mean, interesting. I find that sort of stuff fascinating. Of course, there's lots of gaps and there's quantum leaps of of assumptions sometimes. But what I like about it is that it's a multidisciplinary approach versus the archaeologist just going, this is the only way to do it. And so having a look at that different context, different stories, and then piecing it's like a 3D jigsaw instead of a 2D one.
Right.
Yeah.
Have a look.
The scientist in me is a little cautious hearing all this, and 2 words come to mind right now: Dan Brown. So be careful.
No. Seriously, watch it, because a lot of archaeology is science, right? So they do earth cores, they dig down, they carbon dating. I mean, there's a lot to it, but I just watch it. I'd love to know what you guys think.
I will. I'm open to everything. Listen, I watch videos about how the world is flat. I'm going to take this chance, Tim, since this is your last time on the show, and before you head out, you got all these exams about theology and all that. Just want you to remember, man, when it comes to exams, you win some, you lose some.
Which psalm is it?
22.
I should write it down. Win some, lose some. I think I'd probably lose marks for it, though. I'll put it in a footnote.
But anyway, if anyone's interested, find my hot girls here, 69xxx.site, who's commented.
Yeah, no, don't even quote him. Don't even give him the time of day. I saw it. At least we've got a troll who's logged in. That's nice.
Yeah, at least it's not someone just randomly talking about you being in love with Joe or something like that, which is what we usually get.
Because we're talking about US politics, it's probably on one of the streams that we're live on. They'll be there. Hi, guys.
Oh, no, this is YouTube. That you can see here. It's coming through. Anyway, let's wrap it up. Grant, thank you so much for coming. Appreciate it. Tim, happy holidays. Hope you have an amazing reunion with your family. We'll be back here for the No Show in a couple of weeks without Joe or Tim. What am I going to do? But Climate Courage is on next week, and I'm really looking forward to it, because we're going to talk about why we need to raise human consciousness in order to overcome the climate emergency. So we're going to take a very spiritual concept and make it as simple and understandable as we can, so it doesn't turn people off. That's the goal. So I'm really looking forward to that conversation. But yeah, you guys want to say goodbye?
Goodbye.
Yeah, thanks very much for listening. May all your conversations be open to be. May you be more open to being challenged in all your conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show as well, too. It's been my pleasure, and very insightful for me as well, too, and to share my insights too. And hopefully we all go vote for and make the world a better place to be.
Yeah, I like it. All right, ending the broadcast.